There is a version of the story where I was just trying to make the evening easier. My friends were uncomfortable, the room had a particular tension, and I thought the kindest thing I could do was ask Joel to go home early. He put on his coat and kissed me on the cheek and left without making a scene, and I told myself that meant he understood. What I did not understand, standing in the hallway watching the door close, was that he had been waiting for a long time to know where he ranked, and now he knew. By the time I noticed what I had actually said that night, the man who used to stay in the room no matter how difficult things got had quietly made other arrangements. My name is Nadia Cole. I am 33 years old, and I work as an events coordinator for a corporate venue company, which means my entire professional life is built around making rooms feel right. The right temperature, the right arrangement, the right atmosphere so that no one has to feel uncomfortable for even a moment. I am good at this. I have been good at reading a room since I was a child, because in the house I grew up in, reading the room was not a skill but a survival mechanism. My mother ran her social world through consensus, and if the group decided someone was wrong, that person disappeared from the circle quietly and completely. I learned early that the cost of choosing the wrong side was exile, and I have never fully unlearned that lesson. My husband Joel is 35 and teaches history at a secondary school. He is the kind of man who notices things and says very little about what he notices, which most people in my life have interpreted as judgment, though I know, or I knew once, that it is something closer to the opposite. In our first 2 years, we used to drive to a different neighborhood every Sunday, parking wherever something looked interesting, walking until we found somewhere to eat. He kept a list in his phone of every place we discovered that way. 41 entries. He stopped adding to the list 11 months ago, and I stopped suggesting the drives around the same time, and neither of us has said anything about the stopping. There is a photograph on the living room shelf from one of those Sundays, both of us laughing, taken by a stranger at a hiking trail who did not know us and therefore caught us without any performance in our faces. It has been on that shelf for 3 years. I pass it so often I have stopped seeing it, which is its own kind of information. In early autumn, on a Tuesday evening, I mentioned the birthday party coming up in 3 weeks. I listed the names of the guests. Joel went quiet for a moment and then said fine, and went back to his book. And I looked at that pause and filed it under evidence, which is what I had been doing with his pauses for 16 months without ever examining the filing system. 3 weeks before my birthday, I sat in Becca's kitchen while she made coffee, and she told me, gently, with a prefacing sentence about how much she cared about me, that she and Cassie and 2 others had agreed they would not come to the party if Joel was there. She said it was not personal, that his energy brought down every room they shared, and that she wanted me to be able to relax on my own birthday without managing the atmosphere. She said it as though the decision had been made for my benefit, which is a way of delivering an ultimatum that makes the recipient feel cared for. I said I understood. I said I would sort it out and drove home thinking about logistics rather than what it meant that my closest friends had issued a condition about my husband. Becca has been my closest friend since our first year at university, and what she offers that the marriage has not offered in the past 16 months is total, immediate agreement. This is not a criticism of her. She is giving me what I go to her for, which is confirmation, and she has been giving it reliably and without interrogation, and I have taken it each time because the alternative was to sit with the unconfirmed version of events, which required a stillness I was not finding inside the marriage. When I am at Becca's, I am the protagonist of a story with a clear logic. When I am with Joel, I am a person in a situation that resists arrangement, and I have spent the last 16 months choosing the first of those 2 places. When I describe a difficult evening with Joel, she does not ask clarifying questions or offer the possibility of an alternative reading. She validates first and completely, and then she adds her own data from the accumulated picture of him she has built from my descriptions. I have always found this deeply comforting, and I have never, until recently, recognized that the comfort itself was part of the problem, because comfort that requires no adjustment on your part is very difficult to examine from inside it. The drive home from Becca's had taken 20 minutes, and I had used most of it to build the frame I would offer Joel. By the time I pulled into our street, I had the words: a smaller group, an alternative format, a preference rather than a directive. I had found, over the 16 months of narrating him to Becca, that the way you describe a thing shapes what it is before it happens, and by the time I unlocked the front door, I had almost convinced myself the version I was about to offer was simply true. What I told Joel that evening was that I had been thinking about the party format and wanted to try something different this year. A smaller group, just close friends, and that it might be better if he had a night to himself. I presented it as preference. I did not say, "My friends have told me they will not attend if you are present." I made that choice in the car on the way home, and I was aware of the making. The following Sunday morning, he came into the kitchen where I was on my phone, and I minimized the screen before I had consciously decided to. He noticed. He poured coffee and we ate in ordinary silence, and then he said, with the specific quality of someone who has been thinking about a question for several days, that he wanted to ask whether the birthday planning had become something she was working around him. He named the dates of the last 3 evenings I had taken phone calls in the bathroom, not as accusation, as data. He said he was not trying to monitor her, but that a situation which required bathroom-level privacy to manage was a situation he would like to understand. He said if her friends had made his presence conditional, he would rather know that directly than be managed around it, because he was her husband and not a scheduling conflict. And he said it in the flat, careful tone of a man who has rehearsed the sentence enough times to deliver it without anger. I told him that tracking which room I took phone calls in was not attentiveness. It was surveillance. And that his interpretation of my social life as something he had authority over was exactly the dynamic her friends had been noting for 2 years. I had been preparing some version of this speech for a while. Not consciously, but in the way that arguments assemble themselves in the background when you have been reading a situation as unfair long enough. It arrived with the specific confidence of something rehearsed. I said it, and I left the kitchen, and he stayed at the counter without following, because that was his flaw. He believed that pressing after her departure was aggression, and his particular variety of pride could not accommodate the appearance of chasing, and so he held still and let me leave. And I spent the drive to work on Monday translating his non-pursuit as confirmation that he had nothing to offer, and I had been right. Cassie knew about Becca's ultimatum. She had been standing in Becca's kitchen when Becca delivered it, and she had said nothing in the moment, and she had continued saying nothing for the 2 days that followed. She told herself this was respecting Nadia's right to make her own decisions, which was partially true and also the specific kind of silence that allows a situation to become a consequence by declining to interrupt it. She had known Joel for 3 years from the outside, and the Joel she had observed at dinners and parties and quiet evenings was not the Joel Nadia described in debrief sessions at Becca's kitchen table, and she had never said this aloud because she had decided it was not her place, and she had been wrong about that, but she was not ready to be right about it yet. She sent a breezy text about what to bring to the party instead. On Friday, 3 days before the party, Joel came home and found the party supply delivery in the hallway. The guest list had slipped from the bag and landed on the mat, face up, 11 names printed in the clean font of the catering company's order form. All mine, none mutual, not a single name that belonged to both of us. He picked it up. He read it the way he read most things, quietly, completely, without announcing what he had found. He set it back on top of the bag and went to the kitchen. I was in the living room and heard him come in and heard the particular quality of the silence that followed, and neither of us mentioned the list, which meant we were both aware of it and had agreed without discussion to let the silence function as our response. The night of the party, 12 people arrived over the course of 45 minutes, and the living room filled with the warmth and noise of a room that was genuinely glad to be together. Glasses of Prosecco raised early, two conversations running at once, the particular sound of women who know each other well enough to speak over each other without anyone losing the thread. I was good that evening. I was the best version of myself at a party, which is a version that knows how to keep everything running. Joel was in the house. He had not been told explicitly that the evening was women only, because I had managed the situation through absence of information rather than clear instruction. I had told him the party was a small group and that it might be better if he had the evening to himself, and he had said fine, and I had let fine be the boundary of the conversation, because anything more specific would have required naming what I was actually doing. He came downstairs from the study at 8 o'clock, when the room was already settled and already something specific, in the way that a room becomes something before the person who changes it arrives. The atmosphere shifted the moment he appeared in the doorway. It was not a visible shift. No one said anything. No one looked uncomfortable in any way they would have acknowledged. But it was a shift I could feel the way I can feel the temperature of a corporate event from across the room. Becca's body closed. Cassie became careful. Two of the others turned inward toward each other. I gave it 20 minutes, which I told myself was giving him a chance. Then I found him in the kitchen and asked, in a low voice, whether he would mind heading out for the evening. The girls needed the space, she would explain later. She would make it up to him. He looked at me for a moment in the way he sometimes looked at things, observing, measuring, arriving at something, and asked, quietly, whether this was what she had sorted. I said yes. He said okay. He walked to the hallway and took his coat from the rack. The hallway is visible from the living room through the open doorway, and several people went quiet in the way of people who are watching something without wanting to appear to be watching it. Joel said goodnight to no one specifically, and everyone generally, and his voice was pleasant and even. He leaned back through the living room doorway and kissed me on the cheek, and the kiss was genuine and it cost him something I could not calculate, and then he went out the front door and it closed behind him at 9:47. The room exhaled. Someone turned the music up. Becca raised her glass. Cassie watched my face in the 2 seconds before the smile came back. She did not say what she saw there to anyone. Late in the evening, after the guests left in a warmth of hugs and promises about the next time, I sat in the living room alone. The room had the specific atmosphere of a party that has just ended. Glasses with rings at the bottom, the couch cushions pushed out of arrangement, the faint trace of 12 perfumes, and the general warmth of a space that held people and is now empty of them. I picked up my phone. I wanted to debrief, and I wanted to do it immediately, before the evening had time to be anything other than what I needed it to be. So I sent a voice note instead of calling, because voice notes do not require the same level of real-time editing. I talked for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I said Joel had managed to make the situation about himself even while leaving gracefully. I said my friends had been right about him all along. I said I was starting to wonder whether the problem in the marriage was bigger than I had been willing to name. I sent the note. I went to bed. Joel returned at 7 the following morning. He was in the kitchen in his coat when I came downstairs at 7:15, sitting at the table with the stillness of someone who had been awake in a different place for several hours and was now awake in this one. He did not look like a man who had been crying or had been angry. He looked like a man who had been sitting with something that had finished settling. He asked, without heat and without warmth, whether she had known before the party began that the evening would go this way, whether his leaving had been arranged in advance or decided in the moment when she found him in the kitchen. He asked it as a factual question. I said I had managed the situation the best I could. He said, quietly and specifically, that she had managed him, and those 3 words had a precision to them that I could not argue with and did not try to. He went to the bedroom. He did not sleep, and I knew he was not sleeping because I stood in the hallway outside the door for 2 minutes before going back to the kitchen to make coffee, and the particular quality of his silence from behind the door was not the silence of sleep. At the post-party debrief on Saturday morning, with the debris still on the coffee table, he asked me one question tied to one specific detail. He said he had counted 12 pairs of shoes by the door, and his were the only ones that left before midnight. He asked whether any of the 11 people in that room had been told in advance that he would be asked to leave, or whether the decision was spontaneous, because the answer to that question determined what kind of evening the birthday had actually been. I said I was not going to spend the morning after my birthday turning it into an investigation. He looked at me for a long moment. He said okay, and went to make coffee, and nothing about him looked fine. From the hallway, when he had been putting on his coat, the hiking trail photo was visible on the living room shelf through the open doorway. The two of us laughing in a frame, taken by someone who did not know us, on a Sunday when we had no plan beyond the walk. He had not looked at it when he passed. I had watched his eyes in those last seconds and noticed precisely where they did not go, and I had filed the non-looking in the same mental folder where I kept the evidence of his coldness, which was the wrong folder, and filing it there was the wrong act, but I did not have another folder available that evening, and I did not look for one. On the Monday after the party, Becca forwarded the voice note to the wrong contact. She sent it to Joel's family group chat instead of our university thread. The contacts are adjacent in her phone, the names similar enough. And she realized within 6 minutes and removed it. But in those 6 minutes, Diane had saved it to her phone. Becca called me from her bathroom at 10:30 a.m. to say she was so sorry. She had removed it immediately. She did not know how many people had seen it. I asked who received it. She said the family group. I spent Tuesday managing the radius of the damage, calling people I thought might have been in the group to ask whether they had heard it, receiving answers that were more careful than the question warranted, which told me the content had travelled further than 6 minutes should have allowed. What I did not know, and would not know until much later, was that Joel had spent Saturday at Diane's house. He had not gone to cry or build a case. He had gone because it was the only space in his social world that had not been shaped by my narration of him, and he needed to be somewhere where his own version of himself was the primary document. Diane had made tea. She had not asked about the party for an hour. Then she had placed her phone on the table and played the voice note and let it run for 4 minutes and 22 seconds in her kitchen without saying anything over it. When it finished, Joel sat with his hands flat on the table and did not speak immediately. Diane said only that she thought he should hear it from her rather than from someone who had less reason to be careful with him. He asked how she had it. She said Becca had sent it to the family thread and removed it, but not before she had saved it. He nodded. He finished his tea. He said he would think about what to do with it. What I imagined when I pictured that Saturday at Diane's was Joel presenting his evidence, recruiting his sister, building the counter-narrative. What I did not picture, because it required the ability to see him as a person rather than as an opposing position, was what he had said before the voice note was played. He had told Diane at her kitchen table that he had been going quiet for years because he did not know what language would help, and the silence kept being read as the problem when it was only ever a symptom. He said he knew it was his flaw. He said he had known for a long time that the withdrawal was the specific thing she could not work with, and that he had never found a route around it that did not feel like performing something he was not. He said this without self-pity, looking at the table. Diane had put her hand briefly on his forearm. That was all. I had not been in the room for any of it. On Wednesday, I made a dinner I knew he liked, a specific recipe from earlier in the marriage, one that had become a ritual in the good years and that I was now deploying as a form of currency. I was warm at the table and asked about his classes and the third-year student he had mentioned the previous week, and kept the evening at a surface level that required no one to say anything difficult. At a point between the main course and the end, I offered something that sounded like an apology. that I had handled the birthday badly and I was sorry he felt excluded. I had chosen the phrasing carefully. He felt excluded, not I excluded him. The cost was placed inside his experience rather than inside my action, and the distinction was deliberate and I knew it and said it anyway. Joel set his fork down. He looked at me in the way he sometimes looked at things when he was deciding whether the gap between what was said and what was meant was worth naming. He asked whether she would be willing to have one honest conversation about what her friends had been told about him over the last 2 years, not to relitigate, just to understand the shape of the information that was out there. I said I did not see the value in auditing past conversations when we should be focused on what came next. He nodded and picked up his fork. The dinner was substantially worse after the apology than it had been before it. On Thursday, a colleague passed my desk and mentioned, in the slightly uncertain tone of someone bringing something they are not sure about, that there was a voice note that had circulated in some thread she had been added to by mistake, and I might want to know about it. I went to the bathroom and searched every group I had access to and found nothing because Becca had already removed it, but the fact that my colleague had heard it meant the note had reached people I had not expected it to reach. That same Friday, I came home to find the hiking trail photograph had been moved on the shelf, 3 inches to the left, pushed closer to the wall. I asked Joel if he had been dusting. He said yes. The shelf had not been dusted. The photo was at the edge of the shelf now, as far back as it could go without falling, and I told myself he had been rearranging things the way he sometimes did when he was processing something, and I was not wrong about that, but I was wrong about what he was processing. On Saturday morning, I found the birthday party guest list on the kitchen counter. It was not my copy. I had thrown mine away the night of the party. This was a printed version. Slightly different formatting from the catering company's original, with a date written in Joel's handwriting in the top right corner. The date of the party, in the careful numerals he used for things he intended to keep. I stood at the counter looking at it for longer than the object required. I understood what it meant, and I put it back exactly where it had been, because picking it up and keeping it would have required me to acknowledge that I understood. And I was not ready to do that yet. I made coffee. I moved around the kitchen. I did not look at the counter again. On Thursday afternoon, I met Becca and Cassie at the park near our street, the one with the long bench by the pond where we had sat many times before, always on my side of a situation rather than above it. Cassie had been quieter than usual since the birthday, and I noticed the quietness and chose not to open it because opening it would have required naming the voice note, which I had been treating as a logistics error rather than a content problem. At the picnic table, Becca said it might be good to put something out. Not specific, not targeting anyone, just a warm statement about choosing yourself and your own peace. Cassie said nothing. I held my phone for 3 seconds and then typed something myself. That I had been doing the difficult work of understanding which relationships made me feel more like myself and which made me feel smaller, and that I was choosing myself. 1,500 characters. I posted it from my own account with Becca and Cassie both sitting across from me, and it was liked immediately by Becca, by Cassie, and by 6 others from the group. Cassie's like came 30 seconds after everyone else's, and she did not comment. I noticed the delay and chose not to examine it. Diane screenshotted the post and sent it to Joel before he had left school that afternoon. He was home when I arrived at 6:30. He had not made dinner. The kitchen was clean and the lights were on, and he was at the table with his phone face up showing the screenshot. My words, my account, the timestamp reading 2:47 p.m. He asked me one specific factual question. Was the post about their marriage? Not abstractly, specifically. Because if it was, then he was an unnamed figure in a public document that 600 of her followers could now interpret, and that was a choice he would like to understand she had made deliberately. I told him his discomfort with my having a public voice was not my responsibility to manage. I told him the problem with his approach, the private conversations, the careful questions, the measured tone, was that it had the same functional effect as his silence. It made me feel managed rather than heard. I said the friends he had always had difficulty with were the people who had shown up for me consistently, which was more than she could say for a man who processed everything alone and offered silence as though it were a gift. I said all of this with genuine conviction, and most of it had a real core. And I was delivering the most honest account of my grievances I had ever produced as the justification for a post I had typed at a picnic table while two people watched me do it, and he could hear both layers simultaneously, and I could only hear one. He asked, then, and something in the quality of his voice shifted, the careful flatness dropping away for one sentence, what she actually needed from the marriage. Not what her friends needed her to have, not the version she posted for 600 people, but what she specifically needed when it was just the two of them in a room. He said it was the first time he had asked it directly, and he knew that was his fault, and he knew it was too late. And he was asking anyway, because he wanted the answer to exist somewhere even if it arrived at the wrong moment. He was sitting at the kitchen table with no dinner and his phone face up showing my own post back at me, and 3 years of Sunday drives recorded in his phone's notes app, asking her what she needed from the person who knew her best, and it was the most direct and unguarded thing he had ever said to me in 6 years, and I heard it as one more attempt to put me on the back foot. He was sitting at the kitchen table with no dinner and a screenshot on his phone asking me what I needed, and it was the closest he had ever come to saying he was afraid, and I read it as another version of control. I said the conversation was finished. He stood, rinsed his coffee mug, set it on the rack. He said he would handle things properly from this point, that the next steps would be administrative rather than conversational, and she should think about what she needed to have in place. He said goodnight. He went to the study and the door closed at 9:03 p.m. I sat in the living room and opened my phone. The post had 142 likes. Becca had commented that I deserved everything good. Cassie had not commented. I scrolled through the names of the accounts that had liked it, and I recognized most of them as people who knew me through Becca, or through the group, or through the events I managed at work. People who had been given my version of my life and were now approving of my response to it. I went to reply to something and stopped. There was a quality to the volume of the validation, a specific resonance in being entirely surrounded by agreement that produced a sensation I had not expected and could not name. Not warmth. Something closer to the sound of your own voice in a room where nobody else is speaking. I closed the app. I told myself I was tired, which was true, and let the sensation be tiredness, which it was not. The hiking trail photo was face down on the shelf when I went to the kitchen for water. I saw it and stood with my glass and looked at the back of the frame for a moment. The plain cardboard backing, the small stand, the manufacturer's sticker, before going back to bed. Joel had placed it face down himself, at some point during the week, without telling me, and I had chosen not to ask when I first noticed it, and now I chose not to write it, and both of us were communicating through the object's position in a way that would have been obvious to anyone watching from the outside, and neither of us was watching from the outside. On Sunday morning, a formal delivery arrived at the door. I signed for the envelope without knowing what it contained. Inside, a formal divorce petition with temporary financial orders. First hearing listed as January 14th. The birthday party guest list, dated in Joel's handwriting, was referenced as item 1 of 7 in the evidence summary. The divorce petition had been served 10 days before Christmas. The first hearing was January 14th. I had told Becca. I had not told my family. I went to Joel's parents' Christmas dinner because it was already arranged, and no one had explicitly uninvited me, and I told myself that combination added up to welcome. Marcus opened the door with the courtesy of a man asked to be civil. The dinner proceeded in the manner of a family that knows something and has agreed to let the knowing stay beneath the surface until it doesn't. Lena cracked it during the starter. She asked whether I had found a solicitor yet, because she had a recommendation if it would help. She said it the way she might ask whether I had found a good dentist. The table went quiet. Diane looked at her plate. Joel looked at his. I said I had things in hand. Lena said that was good. The dinner continued. I left at 7:15 and called Cassie from the car. I described the dinner as Joel's family using Christmas to humiliate me. Cassie listened, and then said she had been wanting to say something for a while, that the Joel she had personally observed over 3 years was not the Joel Nadia had described to her and Becca, and that the gap between those two versions was something she should sit with. She said she loved Nadia and was not going anywhere. Then she said she did not think the friends had been right about him. The call ended. I did not text Becca. A 1-bedroom flat, 2 postcodes away. The joint accounts separated. 3 years of Sunday drives in division proceedings. Becca present, Cassie texting weekly. 3 others quietly absent. Joel responding to solicitor correspondence, no personal contact, the 41 entry list, unshared. What I believed gave me safety was consensus, the 142 likes, the room that exhaled when the door closed. What I understand now is that I have not made a single decision in the last 16 months without an audience to confirm it first. The man I sent home from my birthday was the only person in my life who stayed in the room without asking for anything in return. And I sent him home because the room had already decided. The hiking trail photo is in a box in the storage unit. She has not opened it. She spent her whole life making sure she was never the one the room decided against, and she has arrived, finally, at the precise cost of that strategy.